It was a sweltering afternoon on November 18, 1978, deep in the Guyanese jungle. Nearly 1,000 men, women, and children lay motionless, having followed one man's final fatal command. We must start at the very beginning to truly grasp how charismatic preacher Jim Jones led so many to their tragic end. Born in 1931 in rural Indiana, Jim Jones experienced a turbulent and lonely childhood. His father was an emotionally absent and physically abusive World War I veteran, and his mother worked long hours, leaving him starved for affection. Young Jim became isolated, intense, and fascinated with religion and death. He often held pretend funerals for small animals and preached sermons in the style of the black churches he frequented to neighborhood children. These macabre childhood hobbies hinted at the darkness and obsession with control that would later dominate his life. Despite his odd childhood pastimes, Jones was a gifted student, reading voraciously about religion, Marxism, and even the tactics of dictators, most famously Adolf Hitler. By his teenage years, Jim had discovered that preaching gave him attention and influence, which he craved desperately. In the early 1950s, long before the world came to associate his name with tragedy, Jim Jones made a name for himself in Indiana as an outspoken and unusually progressive civil rights advocate. At a time when much of the Midwest still clung tightly to racial segregation, Jones stood out as a white man who not only spoke against racism, but actively fought it. He began his activism through the Community Unity Project in Indianapolis, organizing efforts to desegregate public spaces and provide resources to the city's black residents. Later, in 1955, he founded the People's Temple Full Gospel Church, a congregation that prided itself on being racially inclusive, which was virtually unheard of in Indiana churches at the time. Jones didn't just preach integration, he lived it. He and his wife, Marceline, adopted several children of different races, which he proudly called his rainbow family. The Joneses would become the first white couple to adopt a black child in Indiana. In addition to curating his rainbow family, Jones worked closely with the NAACP and Urban League, attended rallies, and marched for equal rights. Jones personally challenged segregationist policies by taking black members of his congregation into white-only restaurants, theaters, and hospitals, sometimes staging sit-ins or public confrontations to force integration. He even helped desegregate Methodist Hospital in Indianapolis by threatening to publicize its discriminatory practices unless it began treating black patients equally. His church also offered food, clothing, and shelter to the poor, regardless of race, making it a rare safe haven in an era of exclusion. This commitment to racial justice earned him recognition and support from many in the black community and progressive white allies who saw him as a genuine force for change. He was appointed to the Indianapolis Human Rights Commission in 1961, a position that gave him an official platform to continue his advocacy. But while his civil rights work was undoubtedly impactful, it also served a dual purpose. It elevated his status, built a loyal following, and fed into his growing messianic self-image. For many, especially early followers, Jones was a man who not only preached equality, but made it real in their lives. In the mid-1960s, Jim Jones began looking for a new home for his People's Temple. Although the church had made waves in Indiana with its racially integrated services and social activism, it faced increasing hostility and threats. Jones, gripped by growing paranoia and a conviction that nuclear war was imminent, became convinced they needed to relocate. He told his followers that a nuclear holocaust would devastate the Midwest and claimed a prophetic vision had pointed to Northern California as a safe haven. Around 1965, he organized a cross-country move, convincing dozens of families to leave behind their homes and livelihoods in Indiana and resettle in the remote Redwood Valley near Ukiah, California. The journey, made by caravans of buses and trucks, was both a physical and emotional transformation for the congregation. one that cemented their loyalty and intensified their belief that they were chosen to build a utopia. Upon arrival in Redwood Valley, temple members established a new sanctuary, communal housing, and even a small farming operation. The quiet, rural setting offered a sense of isolation Jones believed would protect them from both racial violence and apocalyptic doom. The group quickly became known for its social outreach, opening care homes, feeding the poor, and volunteering in the community. Yet, they also encountered resistance. Ukiah, while far from the Deep South, still harbored deeply ingrained racial prejudices. Many locals were unwelcoming toward the temple's multiracial membership. Temple families, especially black members, faced harassment, slurs, and even violence. To combat threats, Jones established armed security, watchtowers, and evacuation plans. These external pressures fueled a siege mentality within the group, which Jones used to tighten control and justify his increasingly authoritarian methods. His followers, convinced they were under attack for doing good, grew ever more loyal. Despite the hostility, the temple thrived and grew. But by the early 1970s, the rural isolation of Redwood Valley had become a limiting factor. Jones realized that to expand his message and gain political influence, he needed a larger platform. He began holding services in San Francisco and Los Angeles, eventually purchasing a large church in the heart of San Francisco's Fillmore district. There, in a city known for progressive politics and activism, the People's Temple found fertile ground. The temple's message of racial harmony, social justice, and communal living appealed to many, including students, elderly residents, and young activists. Jones positioned the church as both a spiritual haven and a political engine, organizing rallies, feeding the hungry, and aligning with civil rights causes. Membership swelled into the thousands. The temple now had a voice in city affairs, and Jones was soon rubbing shoulders with San Francisco's elite and holding private meetings with First Lady Rosalind Carter, wife of then-President Jimmy Carter. With success came influence, and with influence, deeper control. The temple became known not only for good deeds, but also for its discipline. Members gave up personal assets, lived communally, and followed Jones's guidance in all things, from voting to housing. As Jones's influence grew, so did his appetite for power and control. He orchestrated political campaigns, secured appointments to civic boards, and cultivated relationships with powerful allies. Yet inside the temple, obedience was absolute. Dissent was punished, families were split apart, and members handed over custody of their children and property. What had begun as a radical social experiment in Indiana and a hopeful exodus to California was now evolving into a rigid, insular world built around one man's vision. California had given Jim Jones the stage he wanted, and he was just getting started. Rumors of abuse and exploitation within the temple eventually reached investigative journalists and concerned relatives. Facing increasing scrutiny, Jones abruptly relocated the temple to a remote jungle in Guyana in 1977, promising his followers a utopian socialist paradise called Jonestown. Before we can adequately discuss the conditions and events of Jonestown, it's imperative to contextualize its remoteness. It's impossible to overstate just how remote Jonestown was. Jonestown was set deep in the heart of the Guyanese jungle, over 150 miles away from any viable town or paved road. Basically, it felt like the middle of nowhere. Think thick, dense forest stretching endlessly, and rivers winding through an area that looked almost untouched by people. Even if someone did decide to run, where would they go? They'd be up against snakes, jaguars, and insects that could make you seriously sick, not to mention getting hopelessly lost in terrain that seemed destined to swallow you whole. Guards patrolled constantly, and Jim Jones made sure everyone knew that running wasn't just risky. It was practically guaranteed death. And for those who did dare try, they were caught, punished, humiliated, or worse. In the end, escaping wasn't just difficult, it felt impossible. These were all facts unknown to followers making their way to Jonestown. They were under the misconception that they were bound for a utopia filled with adventure and hope. Upon arrival at Jonestown, initial excitement quickly faded. The harsh jungle environment was unforgiving, and attempts at farming failed miserably, leaving residents exhausted and hungry. Jones's paranoia reached new heights. He controlled every aspect of daily life, broadcasting paranoid rants and criticisms of Jonestown residents over loudspeakers. Day and night, isolating followers from the outside world and regularly staging terrifying white knight drills, simulating mass suicide to test loyalty. The situation reached a breaking point in November 1978 when Congressman Leo Ryan visited Jonestown. Ryan's trip to Jonestown wasn't just political performance, it was personal, intentional, and driven by a genuine passion for service. He brought along a group of journalists, concerned family members, and legal aides, all hoping to find answers concerning the well-being of the followers allegedly trapped inside the compound. One of the lesser-known but influential reasons for the visit was to help retrieve a young child, John Victor Stowen, who was caught in a bitter custody battle. Jones refused to return the boy to his mother, who was back in the US, and claimed the child as his own. That, on top of chilling reports of abuse, isolation, and people being psychologically, and sometimes physically, held against their will, pushed Ryan to act. He had to negotiate just to set foot inside Jonestown, and once he was in, it was clear Jones was staging everything to look like paradise. But cracks were showing, and Ryan's presence, especially with the intent to take a child away from Jones, lit the fuse of a powder keg primed to explode. When Congressman Leo Ryan tried to leave Jonestown, things unraveled fast. After a tense and heavily supervised visit, several residents quietly passed notes to Ryan and his team, begging to return to America with them. That act alone was enough to send Jones into an unadulterated rage. As the delegation prepared to depart, a group of defectors, men, women, even children, joined them and headed to the Port Kaituma airstrip. But as they were boarding the planes, a tractor-pulled trailer carrying armed temple loyalists dispatched by Jones suddenly pulled up. Chaos broke out. Gunfire erupted. Ryan was shot and killed on the tarmac, along with 3 journalists and one of the defectors. Some of the group managed to scramble onto the first plane and, once on board, were fired at by Larry Layton, a loyalist posing as a defector. Those still outside or trying to board were gunned down or forced to flee into the jungle. It was cold, calculated, and marked the moment Jones fully descended into extreme paranoia and madness. Back in Jonestown, Jones called his followers together one final time. Claiming imminent attack, he urged them to commit revolutionary suicide. The tragedy unfolded quickly. Cyanide-laced flavor aid was administered to children first, followed by adults. Those who refused to drink the toxic mix were injected with it via syringes. The scene was so horrifying it was almost impossible for those not present to truly comprehend. Within hours, over 900 people, including hundreds of children, lost their lives. Seeing the agonizing deaths cyanide inflicted on his followers, Jones himself died by a gunshot wound, possibly self-inflicted. A true coward to the end. In the aftermath, the world grappled with understanding how seemingly ordinary, idealistic people could follow Jones into oblivion. Survivors later described joining not a harmful cult, but a hopeful movement. Gradually, however, Jones's manipulative grip tightened, transforming ideals into blind obedience. The tragic end of Jonestown serves as a haunting reminder of how unchecked charisma, absolute power, and paranoia can culminate in unspeakable tragedy. Jim Jones, who once preached equality and peace, left a legacy defined by manipulation and mass death, a stark warning against surrendering independent thought to any single authority. In times of social unrest, when people feel unheard, unseen, and desperate for meaning, movements like this can rise again. Ill-intentioned charismatic leaders thrive in the cracks of a divided society, offering false hope in exchange for absolute control. That's why it's not just history, it's a pattern. If this story moves you, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. It's one way we can make sure their voices aren't forgotten, and that their lives serve as both a testament and a warning for generations to come. Stay safe, and remember, when you feed on facts, you'll never go hungry.